Fáilte, boys and girls, and thank you for inviting me into your classroom today. Today I'm going to share a story with you. My name is Maura, and I'm a storyteller and an actress. The story you're going to hear is from a long time ago, from 100 years ago, and it takes place on an island off the coast of Donegal. It tells the story of a young girl, not much older than ye, and her life in the 1920s on the island of Inniscarra. Now, when we listen to a story, we need to be comfortable and relaxed. So how are you feeling? Are you comfortable in your seat? If you want to put your head down and close your eyes to listen to the story, that's okay too. The story will be told by me, but I will be taking on a character role, like an actress does. And I will be playing the character of Sally Dugan, an old woman who is remembering back to when she was young like you all are, and when she lived with her family on Inniscarra Island. Are we ready? Good. Hello, boys and girls. My name is Sally Dugan, and I've lived all my life on the island of Inniscarra. It's near Arranmore, off the coast of Donegal. I'm leaving me wee thatched cottage today. They say I must go to the mainland. They say it's more comfortable for me there. The county council, they've even given me a cabin, a prefabricated cabin. So I'll have a bathroom indoors, and I'll have a range. Oh, I'll be posh at last. But as I'm about to close me door for the last time in the home that I lived in the home that my mother grew up in, and the home that her mother grew up in, I'll shed a tear. And I'm remembering back to those days when I was a young girl in the 1920s, 100 years ago. Our life on the island then, when I was a child, was a hard life, for it was a life of poverty. We didn't get any government support. Sure, our own country was in turmoil in the 1920s. It was about to birth its own rule. It was about to become the owner of its own country again. And that causes friction, and it causes conflict, and it causes fighting. There was a landslide win for Sinn Féin in the 1918 general election. Oh, not that the British Crown would accept that. But they set up their own Dáil then, you know, secretly. And they even set up their own army, called the IRA, the Irish Republican Army. One or two men from the Irish Republican Army would hide here on the island, be kept safe from the British Army or the Royal Irish Constabulary Police, because they fought guerrilla tactics, and they had to be on the run, and they had to hide a lot. So that'll give you a sense of the country as it was then. And our island would be strange to ye if ye had been back then in those days. We didn't have electricity. We didn't have running water. We didn't have indoor toilets. We didn't have anything new, you know. We wore hand-me-downs. We didn't daydream about street sweets and treats and days away. We just thought about our hungry bellies and our cold wee bodies and our lack of food and our lack of comfort. Our father provided for us because he was a fisherman, and we were proud of him because he was a great fisherman. But when I was 11 years of age, the sea took my father, and he was drowned, for the sea will take her own, you know. And fishermen then did not learn to swim. There was a superstition about that, because the sea is in charge, not us. It fell to my older brother Charlie, he was 15 at the time, to become man of the house. And he had to become a fisherman and learn the skills by watching other fishermen. And soon he became the best fisherman on the island. And only for him and the catching of the herring and the selling of the salmon, we would have had very little. My mother, she never stopped working from dawn to dusk to keep bread on the table. We had a cow, we had hens, and we had ducks. My mother would knit, and then she would get a few shillings for her jumpers and her socks and her gloves that were made with Bohanian wool. And she would collect the eggs. And God love her, she spent half her day looking for lost eggs, for those hens would drift off and they would hide their eggs. But eggs meant pennies, and pennies were precious to us. She never stopped working. Indeed, at times, she starved herself so that we would have enough food. And when there was little food and when there was no money, she would take the wee scone of bread that she baked, and she would slice 9 slices for every one of us so that we would have a fair share of rations. Things got very difficult for us when I was 15 years of age. The fish that didn't appear, there was no herring run, and we despaired. I remember the night my mother gathered us all around to her, and she said the rosary with us as she did every night. And then she told us to stay where we were, that she had news for us. But she was saying it all with a sad face. She told us that we had no money. She told us that something had to be done or we would starve. And a decision had been made between her and Charlie that 2 of us would have to go to the hiring fair in Strabane and be hired out by a rich farmer to work for 6 months on his farm, doing whatever he asked us to do. For that, she would get a few shillings for our long labours, and that would keep the wolf from the door, she said. She gathered her arms around us, and she looked at every one of us, and she says, "This'll be the first scattering of my children. First, it's to the hiring fair. Then it's off to Scotland, and then to America. Will I ever hold ye all in my arms again?" she said. I remember over the next few weeks we started to organise ourselves for the hiring fair, because it was me, the oldest girl, and it was my younger sister, Nellie, who was chosen to go to the hiring fair. Nellie was 12, and she'd never left the island before, and sure I had only been to Burtonport or Dunloe once or twice. Strabane seemed like the other end of the world. My mother darned and she mended our wee pat clothes, our hand-me-downs. She patched them for us with care, with love. She had saved a few pennies, which she gave us to divide between us on the day that we'd be going to the hiring fair, so that we'd have a few halfpennies. She sent 2 men from the island with us, so that they could bargain for a best price for us when we were hired by the farmers. The day that we were leaving Inniscarra, that was a mixed feeling of a day. We were going on a new adventure and we didn't know what was ahead of us. Sure, we could barely speak the proper English. We left in a wee rowing boat from Inniscarra that took us to Burtonport. And from Burtonport we went in horse and cart all the way to Fintown. We got the train there, and we travelled all the way to Strabane. Now, a hiring fair, for those of you that work with cattle and work with farming with your dads, you know yourself, it's a place for buying and selling. The hiring fair was a place for hiring out boys and girls. I saw ones at the hiring fair that day long ago that were only 10. The farmers would walk around and look at all the boys and girls and decide who would be the strongest and the best for the jobs that they needed done. I was hired quickly by a farmer man from near Raphoe. But I watched poor Nellie stand there. And I remember an old gruff farmer coming over to her, and he was pinching her shoulders and her arms to check what fat she had on her. And he even had the disrespect to just pull up her skirt a bit to see what her shanks and her calf muscles were like. Would she be good at the walking? Would she be good at the carrying? And he told her she was scrawny. She wasn't worth much. And he walked away. And then, after insulting her, didn't he come back? And he hired our wee Nellie. I was fearful for her, because I didn't like the look of that farmer. I wished I could change places with her. But sure, nobody was going to listen to us. 2 poor Irish-speaking girls from Inniscarra Island. The men bargained for us and got the best price they could. The farmer handed them the shilling. More would be given over when our contract was over, he said. And there we were, in a place that was foreign to us, where we could hardly understand the accents of the folk. And we were taken to our farms, and we would only see each other every time we'd meet at Mass, every 2 weeks. At least that. When we were hired for a few months, I remember a stranger coming to me when I was out in the byre, slopping out and cleaning the byre for the farmer I had. The man says to me, "It's time for you to go home." And I says, "Is Nellie coming home too?" All excited because I wanted so badly to get back home. I didn't like life on the mainland. And then the man's expression changed and he said that poor Nellie was no longer for this world. that she had a burst appendix, and that her wee body had been poisoned, and she hadn't the strength to fight it, and she died from that poisoning. I didn't know what to think, but a piece of my heart broke that day. And I was so angry, because I knew that that farmer didn't even ask a doctor to come and look at poor Nellie. He wouldn't pay the money it cost for a doctor to come. And he left my sister wreathing in pain for 3 whole days and nights, until the angels took her off to heaven with them. Nellie's body was placed in a coffin, and I sat by it as we were taken to the train. And when we arrived back in Fintown, Charlie, God bless him, my brother, was there to meet us. And by horse and cart we went from Fintown to Burton Port. And Nellie's coffin was placed in a wee rowing boat, the same boat that took us from Inniscarra to Burton Port that day we left for the Highland Fair. And I remember that all the islanders came out to meet us, all in their wee rowing boats, praying for the repose of Nellie's soul. It was Charlie that had to give the news to my mother, and she collapsed to the floor when he told her. The neighbouring women, they stopped their work. They took off their aprons. They put their shawls over their heads, and they walked silently to our house to help my mother in her grief prepare the house for Nellie's wake. The men stopped their doing, the mending of the nets, the gathering of the turf, the feeding of the cattle, the tending to the sheep, and they walked to our house, and they made it ready for those that would be coming to the wake. They brought big stones in and stretched a plank over them for people to sit on. They brought tobacco and some whiskey from the main land to offer to the mourners. Poor Nellie. It was a silent, silent time as I watched that wee coffin been taken into our house. The bed had been prepared, covered in white covering, and linen had been draped around the edges. Blessed straw from the rafter had been attached to the head of the bed for her safekeeping. When a child dies, it is a silent wake house. There were no games played that night. There were no stories shared. Everyone was in shock. The next day, my sister's coffin was carried to the church in Arnmore, and Nellie, my dear, dear sister Nellie, was buried beside my father in the graveyard of Arnmore. Life was never the same after that, you know. My mother had lost her husband and had lost her daughter. No mother wants to lose any of her children before her own time. And her grief took the energy out of her. It took peace of mind away from her. And we watched her struggle with that grief. She never talked about it. She worked harder than ever so that the rest of us would be healthy and strong. But grief wears the soul away, and it wears the heart down. And after a few months, my mother collapsed outside one day looking for lost eggs. The doctor came and he told us it was hunger. That mother had starved herself in order that there would be enough food for her boys and girls. Mother was placed in the bed in the kitchen, and there she remained until she passed away quietly one night with all of us around her. And then it was up to me, Sally Dugan, to take over the role of my mother. I was nearly 16 years of age. And Charlie, he had taken over the role of the man of the house. And he kept looking after us. I looked after the children in the household, and he scraped the pennies that we needed to survive. And that was my life then. At 16, I became mother to my brothers and my sisters. Send them off to school every day, making sure they helped with the chores around the house, and trying to keep a smile on my face so that they would be happier, so that they would be content. Because no matter how poor a family is, and no matter what politics are going on in your townland, or in your county, or in your country, it's family that matters most of all. And it's family that rally round each other to help each other when times are tough or when times are sad. And it's family that we celebrate the best with when times are good. And as life went on for me, I settled into my role, and I took the good days with the bad days, because that's what you do. And I got up every day and I just kept going. So now, boys and girls, Sally Boner's saying goodbye to you now. Sally Dugan was her name, not Sally Boner, forgive me. Sally Dugan says goodbye and hopes you remember a time way long before ye were ever born, when Ireland was a poorer place and a young country just starting to learn all about itself all over again after 400 years of British Empire ruling. You boys and girls, you live in peacetime, where there's no conflict in your townland. We have strange days, I know now, with this virus which is dictating to us all. But Ireland is a free country, and we live in peace. And I hope that you all live well and healthy these strange days. Slán agus beannacht.